What's up? Just tapping back in with the video, and I hope I can be heard right now. I did another video about a minute ago, and there was no volume on it, but it's a little bit it's uncanny that that video didn't work because when I began that video, I did a technique that I don't that there's a one of my like a lot of people will introduce themselves. Like I think like you can mess up in life and also in like online or anything just by as soon as you say anything you already messed up right there. So I used to think that some people say, hey, you had me at hello, but if you can win somebody over, you actually you can't win certain things. Like I'm gonna be one to say, I'm gonna pop up online and I'm gonna say that you can't win in life. You cannot win. That doesn't mean you can't try or you shouldn't try, but you actually can't win in life. You can't make life a winnable thing. What life is not a winnable prospect. People like you before they meet you. You people win themselves over. You don't win other people over. You give maybe if you present your best, you give yourself an opportunity to give other people an opportunity to win themselves over in front of you and read into you something. But still like so if someone's like, "Oh, you had me at hello," you likely had them before hello. But hello is that's the least that you would probably know better than to do would be to even say hello. But you probably do way better if you just didn't say nothing. That's also the best way to introduce a video. But what I was thinking is that like one thing is like sometimes when you look at somebody, you don't know it's very difficult to know what's going on in someone's mind without like an insight. Like I've been at different times I've been said that some people have said that I can read into people because like I'll be engaging with someone exactly as like I'll be estimating how someone is existing in the moment, and I can and by my traction with them. Hey, hi, I got Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer, can you confirm if you can hear me? Because I did a video before this and there was no sound. If you can you confirm if you can hear me? Hi, Donald. What's up? Hi back. Can someone confirm if you can hear me? Hello. Great. Okay, I can. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So what I was saying is that I think that I'm gonna start this one by saying is that I think that you cannot win in life. You cannot win life. You can win in life. You can win with life through life, but you can't win of your own doing. No such thing. But I think you can try. You should try. You must try. You have to try. You better try. It's worth trying. But you can't simply win for something. You can't win for your own doing because I think that people already made up their mind. Like if there is such a thing as destiny, right? If destiny is real, right? If it's someone's destiny to fall in love, but also choice is part of love. If it's someone's destiny to fall in love and to choose someone to fall in love with, that was already their destiny before you had a damn thing to do with having a damn thing to do with. But you might be in a better position to have it happen sooner or more convenient if you're doing the best things. So I still think it's worth doing the best things. But if you can imagine like we're our asses in line, right? So like according to Arthur Avalon, the three worlds themselves, right? Heaven, earth, and hell, they are all yet beggars before the great mother of this life, because it's appreciated that this life comes from a mother. So even too, if we had a father, if you what man do you know that's not chasing behind a woman or hasn't chased behind a woman or wouldn't sell his friends out and himself out at one point in his life on behalf of a woman? So even yet, our father may also be may worship and get blessed by some form of a mother. So from that standpoint, the three worlds are yet beggars, and nothing happens unless they collaborate. Nothing's viable unless it's viable on heaven, earth, and hell simultaneously. Because anything that does happen happens on all those ranges. As above, so here, and so below, and so here, and so above. But I think that like when people like you or they don't, they like your archetype. They like themselves. People actually like them. People fall in love with themselves. If you think about whoever you really fell in love with, right? I bet you they reminded you of you. If you ever had someone like, some people would have like love at first sight, but if you really had an experience of love at first sight, it might be hard to get past that. And then you start looking up things online. You're like, hey, was that my soulmate? Was that? Oh wait, no, but you can have a couple of soulmates. And you might even have a soul group and a soul family. It was deeper than that. Oh, it must have been a twin flame that was my twin flame I had met. There's actually a great there's a great channel called Gold Ray Twin Flames. There's a man named Mel. He spoke about twin flame phenomena, and I had it bad back in the day. I looked into that, just to be candid, and I actually communicated like way back in the day. I reached out to Mel, and he was a beautiful person. And when he talked to me, he was like, I don't know if you ever actually had a twin flame, but it sounds like you had a catalyst in your life. You had something that catalyzed you, and so that's just a word to the wise. If you've ever like fallen in love, if you had an experience that you didn't know what that's about, but you can't quite look past it, or you can't get past it directly, and by the time that you do get past it, you had to do a lot of growing to actually forget about it. Because like some things you never get past certain things, like people that were really rough in your life, that were rough for you, you probably got your best growing from that. But also, you never actually just got past it. You just got stable enough to where you don't think about it as much or hardly at all. But you don't actually get past certain things. But if you really had an experience of falling in love, you'd be damn near researching like what is twin flame about. But there's an actual channel called Gold Ray Twin Flame with Mel, and he actually, a deep thing about that is that he appeared on there with his very twin flame that he was claiming is his twin flame. It was a woman younger than him. He was like, at that time, I would peep him at about like maybe circa 2011, 12, like that. And at that time, he was already a seasoned man. He's probably in his mid to late 60s. Now that I've worked as a PCA, so I can judge the age of a person a lot by looking at them, because I've worked with a lot of people who are middle aged to different degrees of elderly, and I can gauge that. But he was about like maybe in his mid to late. He's actually probably about 70 in those films, the Gold Ray Twin Flame series. But then his twin flame was a woman. She was probably in her maybe 40s at that time. So he's about 70, and he's with a woman who's about just at the latter end, the early stages of middle age, like probably between 40 and 45 she looked like. But she was still actually kind of smoke show. Even, to be honest, she was a smoke show, because like some people are pretty, some people are baddies, but some people are actually just kind of like sensual and like health. They got a healthy build, and they're just sensual. That's a deeper thing that'll move a man differently, just a sensual person. So he's on there making content about twin flame experiences with his twin flame, and like, hey, remember that when we fell in love? No, but tell me about that time when we had like fallen asleep for like 2 days, and it almost kind of felt like we were merging in. Now he said something really deep on there, right? He said something really deep. He said that when he was together with his twin flame, he felt at a certain time like his actual body, his organ, his body was merging with her, like his actual organs were merging with this woman. He said, do you remember that when it kind of felt like this? Now that's a deeper thing, because I think that our organs exist differently, but also they're with us in our experience differently than we experience. For example, when I go like this, I can feel this right now. I can feel this in my thigh, my knee, my Achilles tendon, my index finger, the side of my. I can almost feel this in my entire body that I'm aware of. I can feel it in my left foot, my left hamstring. My left thigh, my left knee, my left foot, my left toes, the junction of my toes to the padding of my foot, my finger. I can feel it a little bit, probably in my face, and it's in my voice. But that too is actually impacting my organs as much as I can feel it, and it's profound for my whole body. And I could potentially, I can feel it just so like that. That's how it's actually also affecting your organs like that. So if you're actually, one of the things that I think is significant about like things that are like say making love, we normally do most of the things that we do. There's like an intellectual part of it, right? Like we like to have fun, like we like to think about things, we like to be entertained, but we more so don't appreciate things as though we have organs and we're existing upon organs. All of our experience of life is through organs. Your eyes, your nose, your whole anything that you would experience, your five senses, and probably beyond that, is only viable with your organs. If you, heaven forbid, you got punched just right, like you got, like someone knew what they're doing and they punch you just right, your whole world is gonna shift right there. I seen that happen to a brother during the time of the pandemic, like when they're fighting in them bubbles like that. I mentioned on another video, this guy, he was like a football player, but he had some talent for fighting, and he was a new fighter. And this actual, like a proper like martial artist that understood himself as a martial artist and had like a samurai tattoo on his back, Alexander Volkov, he kicked the man, heaven for poor thing, right in his solar plexus, and that put him in between the worlds. I was saying heaven, earth, and hell must conspire. He was somewhere in between heaven, earth, and hell for a moment. You can actually see that getting kicked in the solar plexus like that. But just to say that you're if you can't appreciate how your organs are facilitating your experience, kind of like a gaming system. Is like you're having fun with like a gaming system. You don't think about the gaming system very much because it's kind of inert there. But you're what up, friend? That's a righteous friend or brother right there that said what's up to me. But you don't appreciate how that system is supporting your experience of gaming, and that your experience of gaming isn't viable for one moment without that gaming system. And also that gaming system is deeper than you think it is, and it can do different things in different games than even the game you're familiar with or that you enjoy. There might be things you would enjoy better, but such that when people come together, like for say like making love, that's one thing where you're actually really experiencing your organs. You're making love is about organs. Like it's about your skin is actually the your skin is the biggest organ that you have, I think. And your skin is more profound than you might think. Like for example, like your face, like your face isn't just it's different than the skin on your body, but it reveals a lot of your countenance. I think that it reflects. It's kind of like when a microphone picks up itself and there's like a feedback between the microphone and the speaker. I think your face does that with the finer aspect of you that you could call your aura, for lack of a better word. I think that's like that can be an arbitrary and like appropriated word or concept, aura, and it's a very loose concept. According to Arthur Avalon, you have to be careful with things that are loose references to spirituality, like as in like even the very word mystic. He said that the word mystic, it can betray a lot of blundering and double dealing and even ignorance. Not that there's not such a thing as mystic or mysticism, but it can lend itself to being appropriated and very broad and sweeping. Mysticism when it's not like under with discipline or a real life of observance, to be speaking in those terms, because you could be talking about anything with mysticism, or you could be talking about something real or not with that word mysticism. But some words are like that, kind of sweeping like that, but aura is like that too. But I think that your actual the finer part of you that's actually finer than light, which is why it's not revealed by the light, because it doesn't contrast with the light as the rest of your body does, which is more broadly sourced and less congruent than the finer part of you. That might actually be reflecting the finer part of you versus your very face and what can be seen between that, such as that your face reveals how much sleep you have, a lot of your real disposition and things like that. And so that the skin is very profound like that. And according to my father, he picked up somewhere that I was talking to someone the other day a little bit about the evolution of human beings, and that according to Osho, you can think some of our higher order thoughts, like even me running my mouth like this, actual animal, right? Like a canine, a cat, nearly any animal, other than other primates, but that too primates differently. An actual animal could not actually speak like I am and have the thoughts occur to it as it is occurring to me, because its brain is more saturated with blood by being prostrate horizontal like that, according to Osho. By the fact that we stand on two, it's kind of like, if you can imagine working out, right? But it is also healthy, but it's not good to be stifled or stuck anywhere, even standing up straight. Like I watched before the bout with Jake Paul recently versus Anthony Joshua. Jake Paul, he crawled up. They're about to face off. I think they're in a ceremonial face-off. That wasn't the actual fight. And Jake Paul crawled up. He got low on all four, and he crawled up to Anthony Joshua. I don't mean to be speaking out of turn, but that's a little bit of appropriation and arbitrary, because that crawling that he did like that, I think he exactly got that from John Jones, because John Jones would do that in a fight. I never saw John Jones, the great John Jones, do that in a ceremonial weigh-in or face-off, because a face-off is actually a ceremony. That's a ceremony, because that's a solemn thing you're doing when you're agreeing to a fight, right? Real fights are spontaneous like that. You can also choose not to fight in a real spontaneous circumstance. If a fight occur, the circumstances of a fight present themselves, you have the option to walk away, to humble yourself, or not. You have that option. You're not bound by honor and duty and contract the same way. But if you get into like a bout, like an actual a sanctioned bout that you agree to with your life and livelihood and reputation, like these men that do professional fighting, you're locked in differently than a regular fight, and you can't walk away from that the same way you can from something spontaneous. So thereby, it's like something of ceremony that you're consciously going into this, because a fight is actually a dance. You're consciously, intentionally going into a dire, all stakes, potentially no hold barred dance like that. There's something of respect that you can show someone by actually having a face off, and coming as men, and to be respectful like that. So if you were to crawl up to someone like that, like bear crawl, like he did. One is that it's appropriating like John Jones, I would estimate, because John Jones was really prolific in popularizing that, like getting low before a fight, but to each their own, because we're all free to do anything. But then two, to not actually understand what a ceremony would be about, like even being an athlete, that it's actually a little bit of an affront. So he actually affronted Anthony before Anthony Joshua got around to break the man's jaw. He had yet affronted him in a ceremony by crawling up to him like that. But two, when he did crawl like that, that was a great thing he did by crawling, because he actually got low like that, and your brain is different. So that could probably get him in the right mind like that. But there's a little bit of a difference. I think I'm sounding like a professor, but a ceremony is not the same thing as a fight. So if John Jones does that in a fight, by the time you're in the ring, like even probably too, like I think what it might be is that they have this thing like where they do like these interviews, right? So they have these face-offs. Now a real face-off is a ceremony. So too is a weigh-in. But this thing about like trash talking face off, that might be more of an entertainment commercial thing. So he may have been conflating a trash talk face off with an actual real ceremony, to be like to be like going up like on all fours like that. Because you're actually kind of like, really, when a man is standing in front of you on 2 feet and you walk up to him like an animal, you're disrespecting yourself first, and him too, because the two of you are as men, but now one of you is acting like an animal, and you really default to the least common denominator. So you just made an animal out of both of you by crawling up like that. But that too, different thoughts would occur to you when you're crawling like that. So that it's good to crawl like that. It's actually really good what he did to crawl like that, and that would be the greatest way. That's the greatest. I think that's the greatest way to enter, like what John Jones did, get low like that, because all things are better the lower they get. All that hot shit rises, but it's always better to get low. But you think differently when you're in a different position, and especially when you're on horizontal like that. But it's kind of interesting because he was like halfway horizontal. He was actually a lot like a primate, like the way that Jake Paul did that. He wasn't like I used to chase my brother, like we pretend to be like cheetahs, and like because we watch all these documentaries about the Serengeti, and I used to really I used to wish I was damn near a cheetah and a leopard when I was a kid. But the way he did it, he was like a little bit more like a primate. Like he was low, but he was still actually kind of upright, like the evolution of man. So he showed us the evolution of man in one moment. But that's the deeper thing, is that it's likely that in my dad tells me that in Africa, right, like where they're from, when they like, if you wouldn't necessarily want, like some people say, oh, my family is royalty, my family is the king of this the king of this one. Can you only help them with this thing? And then they got this computer idea, but they're actually the king. But my dad actually, it's not to be like flippant with that, but my father knows about like a lot of African history, both his people, our people, and the broader continent. And if you were in the presence of a king, right, of actual royalty, that might not be fun, because you damn sure can't say anything you want. I don't know what that'd be like riding in a car with actual royalty, but he said that when they'd be in front of the king back in the day, you had to walk on your knees. So if you're in the presence of an actual king in Africa, you actually communicate yourself. You travel on your knees in front of a king like that. That there may be no misunderstanding about the lines of respect and authority. Just to be that clear about it, you may walk on your knees in front of a king like that. But you can imagine in primate societies before the iteration of human beings, there would have actually been some discrepancy about how you would stand up, what you communicate nonverbal, because nonverbal communication is the greater part of communication for humans and animals, which are both animals. But so if you're in a primate society, I imagine that some of like primates, some human beings, but also primates, are so political, like really political. Human beings are really political, and so like status is really a big deal now, and probably in as long as we've been on the earth. And so the way we would stand up, or maybe how we have come to being standing up, it has to actually do with your standing in a group and your stature. Like I've made other videos on this channel saying that sometimes when I used to go to church, it felt like a standing contest, because like when you're in that venue, like everyone is standing. They're kind of like you get to stand, because that's another thing too, right? So like my dad says that in African society, you couldn't just walk on 2 feet in front of a king. You had to get on your knees. Now in a church, everyone can't get on their knees in a church because some people are children, some people are elderly, but you still have to sit down. You may stand up, you may sit down, as a minister would allow you to in a church. That's a deep thing, but it's actually reminiscent of what my dad is saying about walking on your knees in front of a king. And then also that too, back in the day before we had like formality and like modern pretenses about being civilized, there would probably be that actual discrepancy about how much of you may stand up straight. It wouldn't behoove you to be deprecating below your actual status, because that could relegate you to, in fact, a lower status, because how you act is also how you may act. But you would want to, or have an inclination to stand up straight, but you may not get to all the way stand up straight. How much you get to stand up straight might have to do with your actual stature in a group like that. But then too, your thoughts are different as you would stand up. So as human beings now, all of us, because of the successes of our history, of our human history in groups, which none of us could have survived to this point and be viable humans without our ancestors having succeeded and them too being viable within groups. So all of us that made it this far, we also, the strength of those groups, we had enough standing in those groups to carry on, and those groups largely have inherited the earth, and we're something of custodians of this earth. But it's just to say that our standing upright, it actually affects the quality and way of thinking. But then on top of that, I've extrapolated that we have the opposable thumbs, and because of that, we can see a lot of beautiful things with our eyes, but also there's no limit, or there's no bound to what we can naturally see, what we can think and feel in our heart, and what we can do with our hands, because your hands will exactly follow your mind, both what you're interested in, what you're afraid of, and so most things have like an affirmative and a negative, a positive and a negative, not good or bad, but just like in active and a latent, in acting and it being acted upon. So your hands can, if you're compelled by something, hey, you go over there right now, go over there. Just by you being told to do something, and you actually paying deference or paying homage or credence to what someone would tell you and their authority and their believingness, by the time that someone commands you, your attention goes, then your eyes, then your hands. Or I'm not sure if it's exactly like that, but there's a feedback between your attention, your eyes, your mind, will, and emotion, that is your heart, and your hands. According to Arthur Avalon, the heart is the seat of consciousness. A lot of people, you can't actually isolate where consciousness emanates from, and a singer would know that, probably a dancer too. Different skills, you would know that you can't actually isolate exactly where your mind is. Like for example, some people that are expert marksmen, you actually pull the trigger accurately with your breath, not your mind, not even your heart per se. Your heart actually follows your breath. Any way that you're breathing, there's a correspondence between your heart and your breath. So if you were turned on by something or turned off, that's going to register in your heart and that to your breath. And it's probably difficult to say which came first, a thought in your heart, an inspiration, an interest of fear, or the breathing. But they're kind of like, they follow one the other like that. You don't know exactly which one went first. But if you sing, anything that you're singing, the singingness of your singingness as a singer, it's actually moving with the music, and it's actually moving that whole time. It's so true if you play an instrument. If you play an instrument, right? So some people would say that, hey man, you can only make sure, like I actually, this might be one instance where I actually bested and bettered my very guitar teacher, who's a maestro. My guitar teacher would take a lot of breaks, right? Like we'd play for a few minutes and he'd say, no, take a break, as though we're getting tired out. But actually, if you hold an instrument, right, like say like a classical instrument, like a guitar player, you're supposed to have your legs crossed. Like if you look up to be one of the best ways to become a guitar player, any kind of guitar, is to start with classical guitar. And one of the greatest books on classical guitar is by, I think his name is Segovia. He was kind of like a little bit of a chubby guy with these chubby fingers that he allegedly spent a lot of practice with. But then he had a understudy that like back in those days, it would be harder it's so difficult to locate a maestro. But this man located Segovia, and I think he had an inroad to do that, and some talent or like some like audition to do that. But then he actually followed up and wrote this book. It's like I think it's called Pumping Nylon. It's one of the greatest guitar books. But in that book, it begins with a picture of him playing music outside, like by a waterfall and some rocks. And also he has his legs crossed, so he's holding the guitar at the right angle, and he's outside in nature. that image alone is probably the greatest insight into being. That's the greatest insight into skills of any kind whatsoever. I am one to say that mere picture, because a picture says 1,000 words. That picture of that man is the greatest insight into life itself. If I had to, if there, the Holy Bible doesn't have any pictures in it, but if they're not to be egregious, and not really not to be egregious, but if I were to say as a person, one image that could go with the Holy Bible would actually be either a genuine smile, like I there's one picture in my life where I had a my younger sibling was like posing with like some of his friends who were like they were like 5 years my junior, but that at that time of that picture they're latter toddlers, like young, like school age children. That smile between them, but also the balance is like these two sweethearts and my brother. The balance of that, and then the smile that came out with that, is the most genuine thing I have seen in this life, and it gave me courage. Like when I was entertaining like thoughts of like conscription and stuff like that, how beautiful that was. But aside from that, if I could think of an actual image that could speak to any story or lesson in the entire Holy Bible, it'd be that picture from that book, Pumping Nylon, when he's sitting outside playing a classical guitar in nature at large, at his own choosing. It looks like a location of his choosing, with leisure on his hands and nothing better to do, and also nothing worse to do than to play an instrument. And some of the beauty and romance, a lot of people they can sense the romance of something, but they may not know what it's about. Some of the romance about guitar that makes guitar really one of the beautiful instruments is that it's portable. I picked that up in a book about guitar, is that the guitar is properly a low budget portable instrument that can be improvised, and it can be brought to almost any function. You could actually show up, if you had the chops, you could show up to a funeral of someone you didn't know. You could show up to a wedding of someone you didn't know. You could show up to a nightclub of a scene that you're not normally privy to. And if you had the chops for a guitar, you would be viable, appreciated, and maybe even loved there. You may actually be able to crash a funeral, and not to be egregious, you could crash a funeral if you had enough feeling, sincerity, and were worshipful enough with a guitar. You could crash into a funeral, and you could play beautiful music that would be exactly suitable to that funeral, whether you're invited or not, if you had the right timing and the right opportunity to do so. So that's how beautiful a guitar is. But if the thing is that when he's holding the guitar like that, right, he looks like he's being fancy with that, but actually he's being ergonomic. So anything that you do repetitively, there will be implications of ergonomic. Like the way I'm holding my phone right now, it's affecting my body on a profound level. There's a brilliant YouTuber. I just came across him today. I think his name is thinking something Pharaoh. Something Pharaoh. He said that your body, machines are very incredible, but your body is the greatest machine. A human body may be the greatest machine to ever be conceived and exist. Because it's not that other animals and creatures aren't as sophisticated and sublime as a human being, but they don't have the ability to actually entertain thought for the sake of thought, reason the way that we do, as far as we know, and also be creative. So actually the highest honor is to allow a person to be creative. When you allow children to play and to draw a picture, right? If you actually bless a child with a blank canvas and some simple coloring supplies, or even writing utensils, that is the highest honor that you can give to a mortal being, is to allow someone to be creative with a little bit of structure and actually a free reigning creativity. That's the highest honor. So according to India, the birth of a human birth is about the highest blessing. It's a lot more difficult of attainment and maintenance than a person could normally appreciate. But that too, the meaning of that to me is that the meaning of a high degree of honor and stature as a birth of a human being, and a decent amount of liberty to experience life and choose for oneself, is to be creative in whatever that would mean to a person. Whether that's even to be productive, like in the trades, there's creativity. If you're so much as problem solving, you're creative at that point. So even where you should work in something manual or technical, if you're actually able to solve problems and make contributions that have meaning to yourself and others, that's a lot of creativity right there. Here goes some creativity. What's up? So the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. That's a do you want to say what's up to YouTube?
Not yet.
You can say hi or show your face, either one.
Not yet. Yeah.
So this right here, this is a friend that I met right here. This is actually this is a master among us. Like I want to show his legs for a second.
big fucking cast, man. Like a big fucking cast.
If you see his leg now, this brother, like a little, he's stocky build, but he actually has some very elegant. Now, we actually look similar because I've been doing footwork. I have on tights like that. Now he has tights. He's heavier than I, but he actually has better footwork, and he's more coordinated and more svelte. Like when a cat is very supple, it's called svelte. So I was doing footwork around here, and I bumped into him, and he gave me a real no kidding lesson. He said, "Hey man, if you ever wanted to get over on someone with kicks, it's all in your hips, man. Yeah. If you ever want to get over maybe some like bedroom cardio, that might be in your hips too. But he might not look like it, but he's actually a master with real footwork on his feet, on his hands. He has some real footwork on his hands. So I wanted to reference that. And then before that, I said that there was a righteous brother that came here who was also great. The film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that's an idiom that's the saying that
So if energy equals equals MC squared is energy, your energy is velocity, so how fast you're moving, like running, you're running 5 miles an hour, squared, velocity squared. So you run 5 miles times 25, I weigh 250 pounds. If I rush you for 5 pounds from 10 feet, if I rush you for 10 feet and run 5 miles an hour and I hit you 250 pounds, I exert 12,500 chi energy.
So what he's saying is that be careful when you step with the heavyweights. You can do that light heavyweight stuff, but that's a real heavyweight right there with the footwork too. So that's what it means. So even like I was talking about John Jones.
So that's why in hockey you can't charge someone. You can't take more than 5 steps at someone and deck them because you're going too fast. You're gonna fucking smash the shit out of them. You take more than 10 steps at someone on ice skates and you check them, man. You're gonna kill them. You're gonna put them right through the fucking glass window.
Okay, so I was referencing the great John Jones, but even great John Jones, he was tentative about going to the heavyweights.
That's why hockey's a penalty for charging.
The greatest fighter that we know of was a prolific light heavyweight, and even he there might be a reason for that. Like the best fighter knows better than that heavyweight shit. So that's the real hashtag, the real heavyweight, man. But so the only reason I bring him up is because according to the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. That's an idiom that doesn't make sense. You can watch the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and you know what it's about. You can see what it's about, but you actually can't exactly put your finger on why they would name it that based on what you're seeing in that film. You can feel it, but you don't know. According to Kaiju Kong, also known as Wayfinder, that's a Chinese idiomatic expression that means masters hidden in plain sight. So I'm actually at a venue where you can meet a lot of masters, more masters that just walk by. Now I sound like I'm just kissing people's ass, but there's actually a lot of masters. If you're actually in a place that has like real business, I'm in a place for getting people's life back together, and you'll actually meet real masters, and that's why it's important to show people respect, because a master may not look like a master until they give you a lesson. So that real heavyweight like that, he had given me some lessons, and like everyone got lessons for you if you listen. But so so the fact that we walk on 2 feet, it allows us to think different thoughts, and then also the fact that we have the opposable thumb with our hands, and also the sophisticated connection between that, our eyes which perceive light, and also our heart, mind, will, and emotion, which is impacted by light and yet affects light. That's really profound, but I think it has to do with trees, because we come from tree. Like if you've ever seen, a lot of people might not know what a box elder bug is, but you've seen one. If you can, where I grew up in the Southwest, and they be called stink bugs or bloodsuckers. Like in the Southwest, they might be called bloodsuckers, but I think a lot of people know them as stink bugs. But that's actually a box elder bug, and it's strange that there's actually some different kinds that you hadn't seen before. Like I was working at a school bus base they're also endemic to maple trees. So wherever you have maple trees, you have box elder bugs. Inordinate, preponderant swaths of box elder bugs will attend maple trees, and I think that's because they're actually the maple tree. They're actually a mobile extension of the maple tree, and it's interesting that they can fly, but you can't prompt them to fly based on fear. You would have stepped on them or violated them before they would have got around to flying, because they don't fly out of fear. They fly out of choice. That's unique, and it's also like you can injure a tree, but a tree actually doesn't flinch at you injuring it. And I read this book that said that all things that exist, right? All people, things, creatures, and even inanimate objects, they have a field of protection around them. So just by the mere the implications of cause and effect, and the counterintuitive responses, and sometimes the time limited, expedited, or delayed, or maybe averted feedback that comes from activities, is that if you seek to or intend to injure or affront anyone or thing, it will actually redouble upon you, and you'll be compensated negatively many-fold for that, both potentially instantly and different degrees here and hereafter until it's really being atoned for. And the atoning more so comes from effort. And they say, according to the older books of the Bible, there's no atonement without the shedding of blood other than the sacrifice of the Messiah, but that too was the shedding of blood. So you could say there's no atonement without the shedding of blood. But another way to say the shedding of blood would be like effort and like effort and health. If you and happiness is part of health, and contentment and success are part of health. So if you mess up for others or yourself, you exactly also mess up for yourself and others, and that will cause health. That is like happiness, strength, and a livelihood, and maybe like opportunity to be living and free. So I a little bit got off on a tangent with that, but what I was saying is that but the box elder bug, you can appreciate it as part of the tree, not something that likes trees, but actually the tree. The box elder bug is the tree, and I think also like us beings, we're also the earth. We're not on the earth or from the earth. We're actually the earth. It's just because like if you imagine like your hair, right? Like you got like, heaven forbid. I'm not trying to medicine has a real bad problem about word of mouth and hearsay. So if you even make the wrong joke about something, now that's your diagnosis and shit. But if you imagine you had some creepy collars on your head like that, it's actually a little bit healthy. Like it might actually be doing it like a service for you. So like dogs have fleas, but did you ever wonder, does the flea help the dog? They would call that like a symbiotic relationship. Like if a whale has those different suckers on it, but so too the earth, it needs a little bit of shifting and engagement and stimulation, and that might be ourself running around on the earth. But the earth is much more decent, much more profound, ancient, and probably exists differently than we appreciate it. It's not just this innate thing like that. It has feeling, it has momentum, and it probably communicates. According to a man I met at a gas station, he said that when you have lightning activity, that's actually the earth communicating maybe beyond, and maybe also with, I'm extrapolating within, because most things go have a forward and an inward motion. But when you have lightning activity, it's actually a communication. And if you look at lightning, there's a couple things that are almost like perfectly artistic and balanced. One is breath. Breath is wasteless, but if you also look at lightning and thunder, it's very artistic how calibrated it is. It's not wasteful. If you look at lightning and thunder, it's actually a little bit sparing. Even when it's a mean-ass storm, it's like, there's nothing of waste, even in an electrical storm. If you appreciate how much energy that is, right? Like I used to have to do a snow removal. So I was working with a man who was chronically ill, and he was in the phase of transitioning out. I was with him for about his last 6 to 8 months living, and I would take him to he was living at his family house in the Lower East Side of St. Paul. It's like a neighborhood that he had been in it since it was a much different neighborhood. I think it might have been like an Italian neighborhood way back then, and he was Italian. But now it's different. The neighborhood is different than it used to be, but not to him, because that's home for him. But he inherited that house, and he lived there. And so I would see like pictures of his family there. But he had like this big L-shaped walkway, and it was pretty big. And when you love something, you care about it differently. So he really loved that house and wanted it to be taken care of well, even as he was transitioning. So I would do the snow removal for that whole block. It was like a big L like that. And then like I would also attend him to some of his medical services. And that's one of the things about like working in medicine, is like sometimes you may overlook the actual social component of that, and just spending time with someone. And so like sometimes life will honor you, and you don't know you're being honored by life. So if you get to attend actually people to some of these chronic and terminal medical appointments like that, you're actually being honored, and you're serving in a deeper capacity than you're normally aware of, just by being a decent person with feeling. According to India, that's called bhava. A person of feeling is called bhava. So if you're acting in that role and you're doing it well, you're being possessed of bhava and being used for the purposes of bhava like that. But he would want me to shovel that driveway like that. And that year, that was like the year of 19. And so, I'm sorry, was that? That was the early 19, not the end of 19, but the early part of 19. In Minnesota, we had something called a white February. It was actually a famous weather system. Like, so you had like the famous Halloween blizzard in the 90s, but then you also had a white February in 19 where it snowed heavily for like a month straight. And at that time, we had some strange weather at those years. Like we actually got away without a winter. Like That happened a couple years ago, like 2 years ago, and back then too. That one, it was a late start to winter, so there's like almost no winter into like January, and that was strange in the first place. But then we had crazy winter. I mean, February with nothing but snow, and I had a cool job back then where I worked from home. I took care of a family member from home, and I was like studying online from home. So I damn near didn't have to leave the house for any reason. I could work from home. I could work at my own pace. I could stop working. I could read a book. I could do some hot chocolate. I could go to school online, all from the comfort of home. Not really home because it's my parents' home, but it's still like home. But then I get this call from my dispatcher. Hey man, we got an assignment for you. Would you mind working for this person and also doing the snow? And it's like a little bit of like negotiating right there. I was like, fuck, I know it's the right thing to do, man, but I kind of don't want to do it, but I'm gonna do it. But don't you know that it snowed heavier than hell that whole time? And but if you just appreciate, if you've ever had to do snow removal by hand manually, you can appreciate how much energy would be involved in casting snow over the whole state like that, the whole region like that. How much it is just to do a little L-shaped walkway like that. That's a lot of lifting. So if you think about that from that standpoint, that's a lot of energy that's going on in these lightning storms like that. Enough to maybe communicate here and beyond, but it's also like very efficient and a lot of economy. But those box elder bugs, but I'm just saying is that the earth has a life of itself, of its own, that's not dependent on us, and it's different than we understand the earth, but also we serve a function of that, and we may be also different than we understand ourselves when we think of ourselves as different than serving that purpose, the very earth and means of our standing upon the earth. But I got around these box elder bugs in like a proper Maple Grove dense area, and they actually have they have a family structure. Like, you see these box elder bugs and they're not running from nobody's ass like that, right? But you can tell, like, sometimes you can tell when they're pregnant. It's very beautiful when they're mating because they mate like, so you would have doggy style, but you've never seen someone mate box elder style. They line up backwards like that, and then they take turns walking, and one has to walk backwards while one walks forward like that. And it's actually kind of deep. I could appreciate that as a child when I would look at that. But you can tell when they're pregnant. You can tell which ones are young, but that too, none of them are afraid of your ass. Even when they're mating, even when they're pregnant, even when the little ones, you can see what the baby ones look like. They actually are the ones that are a little bit afraid. The baby box elder bugs, they run more so in fear, but they can't fly. But then you actually got one that looked like a grandpa. It looked weird. Like they all look a certain way, but you could tell that one is the bull, but it's also like a mature seasoned bull of a box elder bug. And you know that with all of them, you ain't fucking around with all of them because they're not afraid of you. But that one, I remember one time they were on my vehicle, and I had this coworker that was kind of mean to them. She was like kind of getting egregious with them, like the way I would when I was a kid. And then I learned better. But then they would be like this one that looked like the grandfather of them, and that dude, he just looked. I wasn't trying to mess with them because I stopped messing with helpless creatures as long as I've been an adult. But I looked at that thing, that grandfather. He just looked at me like. And to this day, I'm glad I didn't mess up about that because there might have been hell to pay, like as cause and effect goes. But so they're a part of the tree, but I think we're also some form of tree like that. It might be interesting if you actually were to, like, a lot of people, they do like 23andMe, right? This might be an original thought or not. They do like, oh, so this thing says that. So I go up to this Fly Honey at a gas station. I'm like, hey man, I did that 23andMe thing, but they got this new one where you can just look at somebody's face. So it says, according to 23, I'm Yobu. And you're my boo too. So she thought that's funny. And then I was like, but also there's a 50% chance that you're that I'm Nayobu and you're Nayobu too. But what would be deeper than that is if you actually appreciated where your ethnicity is from and what actual trees are prolific there. Wherever you. So according to my father, I come from the Bantu people of Africa. That's like the whole southern region of Africa, like Namibia, maybe parts of Angola, Botswana, Zambia, South Africa, and Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, that whole southern region. Those are the Bantu people. So you have like, I think you have like the I'm not sure what you call like the people of Eastern Africa, like Eritrea, Kenya, Somalia. They may be like there may be a name for that group of family of people because all human beings are families within families within families. but that the southern region, I know that we're the Bantu people, but then my people are more so from Namibia, which is named after the Namib Desert. Before that, it had been German Southwest Africa, but I think freedom was attained in like the 1950s or so, and so it was named after the Namib Desert. And they were sheltered from some of the devastation of colonialism by the actual rigors of the desert. But then when they would end up fighting in the early 20th century, they were actually punished by the rigors of the desert when they were fed up with the fighting because it got very tit for tat and nasty. Like some of our ideas about commandos, like special, a lot of people say, "Oh, I want to be special forces," but special forces, that comes from an older thing about like raiders. Like and that's not only from the Americas. Like in Africa, they would have like these raiders. The Europeans, like the Boers, I think there were a lot of atrocities in the southern part of Africa, the whole Africa. But as colonialism goes, there's a lot of like what do people actually fight over, right? Everybody loves money, right? Everybody loves money. So people fight over contracts about money, like union contracts now. But back then they would have been fighting about like mining and stuff like that, and like resources. That's what people get that nasty fighting about. And so they would be doing that in South Africa. Like I think it might have been the Boers that pioneered some of that raider kind of stuff, and they would have the weaponry and the animals to do that. But then you actually become what you're fighting. So the actual local people there, they would adopt those tactics and return them. So even now, there's a lot like the United States is very violent. It has a history of that. So too does South Africa. But South Africa now, there's a little bit of now it's interesting. In America, there's different things that proliferate on mass and popular media about like invading people's homes at night. Like that's actually a war crime. That's called besiegement. When you lay besiege to a domicile, even a fort. If you were to surround a fort and lay siege to a fort, that's actually a war crime. That goes beyond the rigors and the demands of war into a true atrocity and crime, even in a state of war, even in civil society. How traumatic that is to lay siege to something, that is to kick something door like that. So that proliferates in American media, but so too in Africa. There's a history about about families and homesteads being victimized when they're extended and vulnerable like that to the present. And so that according to my father, that's an older thing that has to do with these raids that they would do. So they would raid human settlements, both the colonial powers and then to the Africans in response. And then you probably had some mercenary activity out extrapolate where you have a combination of both African participation on the European-led side or interests, and then European participation on the African interests, I would imagine. But it amounted to these raids like that, like of a squad. That's like what squad, the word squad, like a lot of times when people playing sports, they talk about squad like it's this cool thing. But when you say squad, you know that means like some mean ass shit, even if you're in sports. But an actual squad is like, that's like a unit, like a mobile unit, like kind of like cavalry or like mounted or very mobile, rapid, traumatic, stuff like that. And so Africa has that history of stuff like that. And my dad would tell me about that. But then at that time, that stuff got so nasty that they introduced a general from Germany, von Trotha. He somehow had experience of war. I don't know if that would have been the fighting in Prussia that amounted to the German state where he would get that training, but he was this very savvy and ruthless commander that arrived after the war from 1904 to 1908 had commenced, the German war in Southwest Africa between the Herero and Nama and the German colonial powers, the recently German, but prior to that, that's the heirloom of the Prussian nation state. And some of those actual cadre, they likely would have had insight in bearing into the tactics and the training of the very Nazis a couple generations later. Not very many generations at all. That's what that. So they actually they stopped sparing women and children and elderly. So it was either they would be put into these concentration camps, and if you looked at that episode I'm referring to, you can see these emaciated people who are incarcerated, men, women, and children, starving, exactly reminiscent of the World War II period, and in chains like that. So they could either be starved, executed, or marched into east into the desert like that. So the very shelter of the desert, it was actually weaponized like that. It would be. But so what I'm saying. But my people, where my father comes from, they're the head. I'm related to the Herero and Ovambo people, Ovambo is more so northern Namibia going into Angola, because some of those are those political, the colonial powers, they divvied up Africa in a, I think there's a, I forget the name of that conference. There's a conference where the colonial powers spelled out the boundaries of Africa, and it was a little bit arbitrary, but it amounts to some of the lines now, and it would be the distinction between Angola and Namibia. But as you go north like that, it's a lot of like more of like jungle and more green, and there's implications of malaria and different ways that you could subsist off of that land. But then as you go south and also west towards the ocean, that's a lot more of a desolate desert. But then they would rely more so on the cattle. The Herero people would. So my father is both Herero and Vambo, but he more so speaks and identifies as Herero. And they would be very closely tied to the cattle, reminiscent of the Native Americans and the buffalo in the United States. And as a non-member of the Native American people, it would be hard to understand or communicate how actual significant the relationship is between them and their food source. I bet it would be profound if someone was privy to have a Native American elder explain the actual meaning and reciprocity and support between the buffalo and the people. But I could just estimate that it would be synonymous, as though they were one people. I recently I bumped into not bumped into, but I one of my first assignments as a special needs driver for a school bus. There was a mature, like a early, late middle school student who's very intelligent, and he told me that he had actually tasted buffalo at, like, he had been to like a ceremony, and he had actually tasted real buffalo before, and that they weren't, the buffalo herds, they weren't completely decimated. They were decimated, but they weren't utterly removed from the earth. The remnants, such as that this child I served had actually consumed buffalo before as a Native American descendant himself. But then too, in Africa, sometimes like my dad would talk about cattle, and like I don't see him the only thing I've ever seen him reveal fear about is poverty, and the only thing I've actually seen him actually get beside himself or passionate about is actually my father was politically active. He was like involved in the struggle from apartheid, so much as to be pursued and abducted by different police at different times, or at least interrogated. But I never actually saw him get passionate or beside himself about anything but the subject of cattle. He gets animated about that. So their fighting, it would have had to do about cattle, how it got that nasty, where they stopped showing mercy. It was probably on both sides, I would imagine, that there was a lack of mercy, because war itself is a lack of mercy. But according to him, our people, they haven't actually been in that area for a long time. It's gonna be a long time. According to him, it's only a matter of like a few hundreds of years, maybe, if that people has been in that area, the Herero and Ovambo, which are very similar linguistically. That when they're the Herero people, that's the Over Herero. When it's the Herero language, that's Ishi Herero. When it's the Ovambo people, I'm not sure how you say, it might be Oshiwambo, the people, but it's Ishiwambo is the language when it's referred to. But those people, they come from like Tanzania area, not very far away from the people, I think like the seat of life. It's interesting, like someone on this channel, they asked me if I'm Jamaican. And I guess maybe my appearance would be reminiscent of Jamaican. I don't think I would necessarily look like an actual person from Jamaica, necessarily, generally speaking, but maybe someone's concept of a Rastafari would be reminiscent, and then they would associate that with Jamaica. Because I actually met a Jamaican brother a couple of days ago. I was at a pizza place, and he was like, yeah, I'm from Jamaica. He was telling some people, he was like, what did he say? He was like, he said something, and I told him a way he can make it sound like slicker like that, like to really like sound like I can't remember how I said it, and then he was like, I said that's how you would say it, and he's like, hey man, I'm from Jamaica anyway. I was like, oh man, you're really from Jamaica? Because you don't even sound like it. He's like, yeah, that's because I'm so much from there that I don't even need the accent or your bullshit. So he's saying I'm so much Jamaican that I don't even need the accent. But so he didn't necessarily look anything like me or like having long hair, but he was a real, no kidding Jamaican. But the idea of Rastafari, I think it has to, what Rastafarianism is, as I can appreciate I actually procured a book about Rastafarianism. There's a book about I'll try to include it. I'll set an intention to return to this video and upload the actual title to this book, but it's actual scholarly rendition, and it's a collection of interviews, but it was written in the late 80s, I think, and it's a collection of interviews of living authentic I think Rastafarianism was a movement. Some people, I'm not sure what the distinction is between a religion and a movement, and probably a lot of your religions were actually movements at one point. That's probably really what a religion actually is. I mean, it was like a movement, because like you have the Mormonism movement, the Protestant movement, Saint Thomas Aquinas, so you can maybe say there might have been a Catholic movement, and then I think a lot of things were actually a movement. So you could almost say, I don't mean to be egregious with it, but you could say the civil rights movement, and then some of our like the multiculturalism and free love, free reigning love like that. You could almost call that a religion in that it's a movement. But I think that Rastafarianism, it may have also been a movement like that. And so by the time this scholar went to Jamaica in the 80s, he was looking for real remnants of the original movement of the Rastafaris when it was in sway. And a lot of those people, they wouldn't necessarily tell them themselves or reveal their identity as authentic Rastafaris, but he had to just be cool enough and be privy enough to be brought on to meet some of those people. And they gave the real testimony and hard-won experience of what that movement was about in that book. But even by then, the 80s, it would have been difficult for him as a scholar to locate authentic Rastafaris. I'm not sure how, I don't mean to be arbitrary by saying authentic, because I don't know how you calibrate that. But so it would actually be difficult to locate and gain testimony of an authentic Rastafari then. But it may be more viable now, because some things have something called recrudescence. So that's like the tendency of something to reemerge once having been around and either celebrated and or opposed and or like maybe censored or for lack of a better word, stamped or rooted or routed, and then come back like that. That's called recrudescence. But then also when you have media influence like what we have with mass communication, like radio and television, even since the time of the original Rastafaris, I think that was like maybe the 20s or 30s, if I'm not mistaken, technology, communication has rapidly proliferated from then, such that a movement like that and the remnants of that movement itself in its original state, it can catch wildfire and wind and sway as it could not likely before, based on the communication. So it could be maybe more in vogue and more popular than it had been even in its prior iterations, based on the mass information and communication. So I don't know if there's actually more authentic Rastafaris now, but according to that book, they would be difficult to locate in the late 80s. But what I understand that movement is about, that movement is about the worship of Haile Selassie. He was a man from he was a president of Ethiopia, I believe. Now there's a lot, just that alone, the African descended president leader of Ethiopia. If you know what Ethiopia is about, where it's located, and what it has to do with the history of human beings upon Earth, and also what it means to Africa and the history of human beings on Africa and Ethiopia itself, and what that has anything to do with the Holy Bible, the real location of some of the stories of the Holy Bible, and maybe some of it, if its authors and proponents, the books of the Holy Bible, you can say a lot if you just appreciate that on the surface. I won't claim to know more than that. It's just that I can recognize that it'd be significant that a person would be a melanated descendant of Africa and leading Ethiopia itself and viable like that, and have some of the track record that he did and some of the feats that he did, enough that people in Jamaica, who my dad says that as you travel Latin America, probably the Caribbean too, but Latin America, you'll find that people have a great appreciation of Africa. I've said on this channel that a lot of the experiences of colonialism have been different in the different regions of the Americas, and some of the hardships and some of the tactics of breaking people have been different, or of breaking, for lack of a better word, slaves. Slave is a connotative reference, so slave refers to Slavic in some of the iterations of human servitude as the Slavic people went. But I think that American slavery is not the same thing as slavery in the true sense of the Slavic word, but we know what is meant with that reference. But according to, or that analogy or metaphor, not for lack of a better word, but according to Tashriq Bey, when you introduce a connotative verbal construct like that, that is like connotative would be like symbolic, where denotative is literal, spelling and or numeral. or etymology, like etymology proper, for lack of a better word. According to the book Understanding Poetry, fourth edition, all etymology and word forms themselves, they begin as actually connotation and metaphor par excellence, closer to long of slang or colloquial idiomatic expression, but also that too in similarity and symbology. To say one thing is another or as another is metaphor. To say it like or similar is simile, but probably simile is a degree of metaphor, but almost all statements at all are just metaphor. Because what are we talking about if we're not making connections? And what are we doing with connections other than metaphor? So you could say all of communication is metaphor, but that too, when you employ connotation loosely, it requires some skill to be effective with it, but also there's some leeway and some discrepancy in how well-meaning or not you could be with connotation and how you could mislead or lead another person. So they say that half-truth is more dangerous than a lie, and also a connotation could also mislead more so than actually a lie, because connotation can be like, hey man, because we about to, you know what I'm saying, we're about to head back to the crib, you know what I'm saying, and then so we about to do what we do at the crib, you know what I'm saying, because it's about to be lit at the crib, you know what I'm saying, and we about to do the damn thing, I told him, man, I'm gonna let it do what it do, because that's how I always be with me, because you know what, like when you on me, like saying, you know what I'm saying, I'm not saying I'm the big G, but you know what I'm saying, but a little lowercase, you know what I'm saying, and I'm not trying to call myself number, because it would have been about like that, because if anything, because I'll let it be known, you know what I'm saying, because that's how I get it, that's how I be like that, you know what I'm saying. So what the hell did I just say right there? What did I mean? You can smell, you smell me? You smell me? Yeah, you smell me? Right? You know what I'm saying, but you also don't know what the hell I'm saying, and then a lot of statements are like a contract. So anytime you're actually in proximity to people or communicating, you're making different overt and implicit. Implicit means like implied. Tacit also means like simply understood. You're making you're making implicit contracts. So you can be held to account and you can come to contention over that. So if I'm speaking that loosely and poetic and creatively, but also because I was being assertive like that, being assertive is with a threat. So when I was speaking like that, there's different degrees of threat that I was conveying like that. But when I would be like a little bit like, when I'm taking, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, like that's it, actually assertive, but there would be a threat that could be with that, such that could amount to a degree of leverage, that agreeing to something you didn't mean to agree to, say yes to something you didn't feel yes about, say no to something you didn't say no about, not be sure about something that somebody else was sure about for you. So its connotation can actually be there can be limitations with connotation. That's on the negative, but on the affirmative, that's actually what language comes from, and then that's also what art and literature and probably even like scientific nomenclature. It's still not different than that. I wanted to point out that distinction, but I a little bit lost that train of thought. But what I was saying is that the Rastafaris, they believe that Haile Selassie was I'm not sure if he would be I think that he was a messiah of theirs, and that is what an actual African descended man is. Who he was like a symbol and maybe an example of being greater than colonialism. He himself was not away from colonialism because it affected the whole continent, but he was a leader of the continent of Africa. And the world has been impacted. But I think that some people would say that the world goes the way that America goes culturally. But I think that the viability of the world, a lot of it actually comes from Africa, because what would America have been without the African contribution? What would Europe even be without the African contribution, like what the Moors contributed? And then they say that in the oldest sense, and also like what like Mesopotamia, Coptic Egypt, agriculture, water irrigation, how that blessed Europe, and then that amounted to like maybe feudalism. Maybe that was appropriated with feudalism, like with some of the conquesting. And then also like the literature, how did actually Europe become literate enough to write or be familiar with the Bible and thereby have a church, and then have some of the ethics that came with the church and the cohesion socially. And then they say that also, I read a book that said that some of people's ability to be compassionate and what brought, because how did we go from the Dark Ages to the Renaissance to the Age of Enlightenment and heretofore to the digital point? You can extrapolate that was from the printing press, and that was from literacy that got us from the Dark Ages / bubonic plague to having science, health, medicine, the Renaissance, the arts, stuff like that. It's actually literacy, but literacy exactly allows someone to see from the lens of another person. I'm not original for that concept of what literacy can enlighten people to do that, but that shows you what literacy did for Europe, and then what Europe also has done from the earth and Europe's contribution. But I imagine that literacy, it may stem more so from like the Middle East, because you had great universities, libraries, and people in the Middle East, and some of the stability and time on their hands that would have came with like irrigation and agriculture, and like being organized about farming. But so if you look at all that, and then you have someone actually viable in Africa, that's Haile Selassie and what he may have meant to the Jamaicans. But according to my dad, is that the expression of the experience of slavery in the Americas was different, and then also the confusion about coming from Africa, or what Africa means to people of African descent in Africa and the diaspora to people in the Americas, it has been different. And so my dad said that when he went to South America, like in the 80s, right about the time when I was being born, they actually had a really deep reciprocity and affinity for Africa. He appreciated that. Like he went to Nicaragua, I think, and maybe a couple other places. He was with some religious people in Nicaragua in the 80s, and he said that they would do like ceremonies like similar to a powwow, and they would want to see him dance. Like not to say like, hey, you must be able to dance, but they actually like they were really happy to share their culture with him, specifically by him being from Africa, and they were proud of their African heritage in the Latin Americas. But sometimes in the Americas, like, I'm first generation American African. I appreciate myself. But when I was coming up in school, I actually got a lot of ostracism and mean-spirited commentary from all the children I grew up with, not the least of which the American African too, is that there had been some rough parts about being African here. But my dad said that might be coming from some of the oppression and some of the brainwashing and the actual torment of slavery to confuse us about our history, and to be mad with one another, which actually serves the position of being in a weaker stance socially and economically. But so in Jamaica, it's likely that they had I know that Jamaica itself, it's been documented that colorism has affected the entire world as it's been affected by colonialism, but it's been different and had different implications in different caste systems. Because different parts of America, they have different social structures that are like a caste system. A lot of ours now is like it's heavily to do with medical and like your conduct as your appropriateness. A lot of America is about drugs. Everybody has something to say about drugs. So like I'm in this venue now. I showed you some of the people that come through here, the actual masters among us. But there's much to do about nothing, much to do about drugs is America. But everybody in America, they fetishize drugs, they fantasize about drugs, they spend their life, sometimes they sacrifice their own life and their family about drugs, but also a lot of money is made out of it, both selling it and also penalizing it, and it amounts to a convenient caste system where everybody's about that shit, everybody likes all the songs about that shit, but some people get it bad and they get penalized for it, and they pay a lifetime for that, and that actually serves the social structure, which also enjoys the music about drugs. But it amounts to like a caste system that has a moral in the past, the caste system would have had a moral pretext or pretense. So you would have like notions about sin would give you your social stratification and caste system that was probably equally arbitrary and penalizing and or profound in benefiting if someone got the better end of that based on one's standing in the church, which was the community. For both African American people and slaves and the European society in America by and large, and there was no getting around that until some of the intellectual liberties that came in the 20th century, I think. But then when some of that was debunked or it wasn't viable with the actual the means of production and the lifestyles, then it migrated to things like politics, like nationalism. And then economic things like getting away from like being afraid of communism. I'm not advocating for communism, but someone's actual engendering or how someone would appreciate themselves as a national citizen and also a proponent of capitalism. It featured into like an arbitrary caste structure, like around McCarthyism, and then when you had the sexual liberation, the church was still enswathed with that. But in impacting families, which is the standpoint of the society's economic viability, But then with the introduction of birth control, you couldn't control people specifically around family creation. So that's where the medical sophistication came in, and you have like the DSM and some of the arbitrary notions of that exactly neatly give you a secondary caste system, a means of checking in with people, rendering people, humbling people, the same way that the church may have, and things like confession and notions of confession and sin and being absolved of sin and the actual sway that clergy would have in the past. It actually was handed off to the medical establishment, to my estimation, and statements like that have been echoed by, or not echoed, but it came from people like Osho, who brought up the profoundness of the sexual revolution and its real implication. And the implications are far beyond that, and I can't do justice to it in this video. But just to reference that the actual the caste structure has went through different iterations. Probably was the church. Before that, and part of that was just straight up feudalism, whether you get to have time to go to church or not. Then it was the church. It may have been actually fighting in like bravado and gladiator stuff, the Roman stuff, I imagine. But then you had feudalism with that, different degrees of entitlement and like elodial titles, like family duties upon family, and then duties in a community like that. All that's feudalism, especially along like notions of patriarchy in Europe. Then in the Americas, with this newfound the things like manifest destiny and gentrifying the actual land of America with some false pretenses and breaching of treaties. Then you had a religious structure framework that also exactly initiated and sustained a caste system that probably would have been arbitrary and horrible, or maybe affluent if a person had the standpoint. Then in the 20th century, you had some discrepancy in fighting like between America and Europe, and you had probably nationalism, and then part of nationalism is the means of production, so you have capitalism with that, and then also you had the proliferation of propaganda in Hollywood that got America on board with the nationalism, because America itself it's a very xenophobic culture for people of any descent, English, Italian, African, Chinese, you name it, any people themselves, even the very English people who founded America, they still yet experience xenophobia in America at different times, because a lot of people in America, they might have things to say about England, even as they have descended from England with the original colonists. So America is like a melting pot, but they really actually mean that. A lot of things have a light and a dark. So America is a melting pot. Yes, that's enlightening, profound, and have given us liberties and probably blessings as has not been told or experienced on earth with human societies, as much infighting as we do. But then also the dark side is that it just humbles people and it strips people of their background in xenophobia, which is that a lot of people that, like according to my father, a lot of people who are proud of their ancestry from wherever they designate from, they actually don't actually replicate or live the actual real traditions or have things that are reminiscent of culture as people in other areas do. And that's a function of the xenophobia of America. So there may not have been an actual strong, real spirit of nationalism properly as we have it now prior to Hollywood. But then some of the very cadre who would be students and proponents of Freud, and actually family members of Freud, who also pioneered a lot of the concepts and the notions that amount to psychology, psychotherapy, and what gives us now our medical establishment, stratification, and near about tyranny at times. It comes from Freud too, but then part with that was the actual propaganda that coincided with. So you had radio proliferate in the late 1800s, I think, and then with that you were able to put music and entertainment on radio waves, and you have families gathering around the radio. That transitioned into television, then different degrees of entertainment, including on streaming. Radio and television are in the older iterations are streaming. Then once you get into like then once you have television, you can change the channel. That's a little bit on demand, but it's a step in between on demand and streaming. Then in the 80s you had like or at least the 80s, at some point you have cable television and also satellite, and that's more so on demand. Just the fact that you can see when the programming shall occur, what the shows are about, and when they can be anticipated. In the past, you probably didn't have privy access to the programming as much as that, but then that's different degrees of on demand. Then you have the video games coincide with that, the arcade and stuff like that, the different cool systems of the 90s. That's more so of on demand like that. Then you get to but then as a check to that, but actually would make that more, would actually serve a lot of things that would challenge something. They actually amount to serve it. So when Napster came out in the '90s, somebody that sometimes you don't think about like how much what a freedom fighter might look like. That guy that brought us Napster, he might have actually been some form of a freedom fighter. I'm not sure if he's for the system or for the people, but that was a check to the actual. That whole time, the greater media companies, they had ironclad control over all those means: the radio, the television, the cable, the satellite, the music entertainment like cassette tapes, CDs, and then what gets to be played on the radio. But the anomaly in that, the anomaly actually proves the system and sometimes makes it more robust, is the proliferation of Napster and CD burning. That was the other side of CD-ROM. So you have CD-ROM, but then you have, so most things they have an active and an acted upon. So you have CDs that you can procure and that are written for you, but now you also have CDs that you can also write with CD burning, and that's like Napster. So Napster came out, it bucked, it changed, it was industry, it upset the actual way of operating of like music and control and money making, but not things can only like you can only have good weather so long before that other stuff come back. You can always have spring and summer so long before the winter come back. So then you had him do that. He got in trouble with that, I think legally, and that was done away with Napster, but it turned into LimeWire. So LimeWire existed at that time at the late '90s. Napster was like the very late mid to late '90s. Then he got in legal smoke with that, and it transitioned somewhere along there to LimeWire. But then as that happened, you had, and as a response to that, Apple Music, they did that at iTunes. So they said that yes, it's bogus to have to buy a whole CD if some of the tracks are whack, but you can buy one track at a time. You don't have to rip off the artist, like stealing their intellectual property, like it can be reasoned ethically that was happening with Napster, depending on how you would take that. But then you can at least pay for one song at a time. So that's actually on demand, but you're actually paying for it. But then that gave Steve Jobs the concept of the iPod. And at that time also you had the flip phones were very big back then in the late '90s, but you didn't have an actual smartphone. You then so you had the pagers. First you had the big chunky phones in the '80s, then you had pagers in the '90s, then you had just like very inefficient cell phones in the '90s, which were like they weren't as bulky, but the plans were really janky, and the roaming was janky, and the phone was just basically, it wasn't really all that great. But then you had these flip phones. I never followed trends, so I didn't get on with the flip phones, but they came out in the late '90s, early 2000s. Everybody's ass was about flip phones. But then you also had this thing called like a BlackBerry, which was like a digital planning thing. And somehow combining the BlackBerry, I extrapolate, with the iPod and like Steve Jobs, that gave you your smartphone. And that coincided with social media, as you had at that time. You had Black Planet, MySpace were like the original social media. And then you have like Facebook, obviously, and then following that, YouTube, and the rest was history after that. But those are different degrees of on demand. All that, it's like so you got more and more from streaming to on demand is where I was going with that. But then you have like but then you also have like but to get from this xenophobic culture to the cohesiveness, and also the potential to stratify a caste system based on national allegiance, that took propaganda. So that was like during World War I, America was reluctant to go to war, and I imagine that there were different notions about what it means to be a national citizen, what labor rights are and should be. That was very contentious, and you had a lot of fighting, like between organizing around labor and going to war, World War I and stuff like that. And then you had the proliferation of some of the students and family members of the regime in the intellectual regime of Freud and his actual students and understudies. One notable of which was Carl Jung, but I think they were actually more eminent and or influential and or efficient students of his, and some of them went over to the propaganda side and they leveled some of those. His insights, I think, came from yet other savvy and more obscure people. Like he would spend time with like some of these like bohemians and like very slick people and enlightened people like hypnotist and stuff like that. So I think he may have actually lifted and appropriated some of his real insights and some of the standpoint for his greater personal insights. Hey, he wasn't actually the originator of even his own school of thought. If you look back in some of those books about Freud, where there's some candor in there, but that family that actually became a part of and transitioned into Hollywood. So it's interesting. If you know the real history of America, you know that there's an actual seamless transition and probably now present there's still actually a presence in both science and art. Because you say like, are we about STEM? Are we about the humanities? Are we about America? Or are we about Germany? We're all of that because the actual cadre is like, a lot of people would say that, is that interesting that Einstein came from Germany? He's one of the greatest scientists that we've ever had. He benefited America, but he came from Germany. Einstein wouldn't have been the first president or probably last of those scientists, or he wasn't probably the first, then only, or then later scientist to come from Germany and figure into American science. Such is actually NASA now. It's appreciated that, according to Alex Jones, NASA is the heirloom in the actual interposing of the Nazi scientists. They actually had opportunities and segues and quiet career transitions neatly from Germany to the Americas. So whatever kind of crazy over-the-top experiments they were doing and the insights from that is actually still going on in terms of NASA, at least. But then too, on the other side of that, media, stuff like that, a lot of the actual brilliant media pioneers, they came from Germany too, prior to World War II in Hollywood. So Hollywood is the remnants of German brilliance as the mind goes with Freud. And because a lot of actually, you think that you go to art school or you go to film school and it's like this artistic thing, but it's probably actually very technical, almost damn near scientific. And I'm not saying that Germany itself is just scientific, because that'd be prejudice, but some of your great thinkers in terms of psychology and persuasion, and that too, like filmmaking, which picture speaks to you on a primal level because we think in pictures. So there's almost nothing more powerful than the influence of pictures. But if there were anything, it'd be the actual power and influence of science. So you get exactly both of those inherited from some of the German brilliance like that. But then that would have been some of your arbitrary caste stratification based on notions of allegiance, patriotism, and also what it means to subscribe into the American way of life, that is capitalism, and the contention that would be amount. Sometimes you can write people, if you don't want to fight someone or you want to fight someone well, you have a way to mock them or dismiss them. So now you would call people, in the past, if someone wasn't in well with the church, whether from their own well-doing or misdoing, they'd be like a heretic or a sinner. Then in the early 20th century, when they were getting past, we had some of like the surpluses of those wars, like World War I or II. When you organize like that machine of that actually changed the structure of society, that you have to improvise and change with that too. So you went from having arbitrary caste structure based on sin and moral idealism and religion and dogma. Then you have similar notions about economic activity and also group membership in the terms of nationalism. So you could dismiss someone as either, in the past, you could dismiss someone as a heretic, a false prophet, a sinner, and or some kind of a witch, or like he said, like another faith like that. Then after that, you could dismiss someone as a communist, a spy among us, a socialist, things like that. So if someone were advocating for labor rights, you could call them a socialist, or if they were just simply for straight up labor, I'd imagine you could call them a socialist. If they had more of a political bent, or more of a humanitarian thing, and a worldwide thing, or like connecting with other people, they call that an apologist. I don't mean to be arbitrary with that, but if you take up the cause of somebody, you're one of their apologists. If you take up the cause of someone different than you, or different than your actual your countrymen or where you come from, that's an apologist. So if you were enlightened or open-minded enough to consider the plight of human beings in other places and some of the same similar struggles about fair wages, fair working hours, decent standard of living, you could probably be called a communist like that. And then at any range of that, you could probably be called a spy, whether a socialist or a communist. And that exactly was treated and calibrated and reined in and checked and substantiated by Hollywood and the different notions that Hollywood would sell to people. Then, as that was happening, and at the end of that, you had the sexual liberation with the appearance of birth control. So you had the McCarthy era, right, like the 50s and stuff like that, which would have been the latter end, the actual heat, the zenith of that caste system and that stigmatization, which is part of castigating, based on economic activity and thereby nationalism and in-group membership in the McCarthy era, McCarthyism. And what that did to even Hollywood itself, to actually clean up Hollywood itself, which gave you some of those notions. For that, I'm saying that facetiously, to actually rein in and tighten up Hollywood itself, propaganda itself. They actually weren't afraid to put McCarthyism onto Hollywood itself. That's the at-home, in-home baseball. Then abroad, you had the conflict in Southeast Asia, which was exactly part of that. It was part of those similar notions of communism, socialism, and economic activity abroad, and it would have taken different degrees of Hollywood likely to sell that one, because all things have to be sold, even war, and propaganda is the best way to sell war. And propaganda is not new to the 20th century, but that too upon film and radio means, that is radio, television, stuff like that, and like recent media. And like probably more sophisticated magazines and print would be part of that. It's another level in the 20th century of propaganda, and that, so it's interesting. You had a lot of wars in human society, but nothing as crazy as nothing as wholesale and intense, relatively speaking, as World War I and II. And those exactly coincided with the more sophisticated communication and propaganda. As the propaganda was ratcheted up, and the communication could be spammed out broader with the radio and television prior to and during World War I and II, you have those actually more those more intense wars that would coincide with that. And then I think that the Vietnam War was part of that. But then things actually sway like a pendulum. So because of the availability of the mass media and the propaganda, it can actually sway the other way. So you had some enlightenment with that. So you could say that you had the flower generation, the hippie movement, for lack of a better word. They actually stood up to it, and they actually gave the apparatus, the system apparatus, a taste of its own medicine, and they were actually transcend some of human suffering with the very means of creating human suffering with that mass media like that. And the Dr. Martin Luther King, whose real name may have been Michael, according to Tashriq Bey. Martin Luther King, whose real name may have been Michael prior to his assignment, whether he chose that assignment for himself or not, or made that assignment for himself or not, according to Tashriq Bey, had been Michael. And he also exactly, probably no one has maybe done it better than him to use that very apparatus, the actual propaganda apparatus, mass media, rapid mass media, for an enlightening purpose. And then he put his life on that and down for that. And so commendation to that man, whether his real name had been only the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and or a man named Michael. But things don't just stop there. So then it come back, and it still come down hard like that. And then also you could say that I think that a lot of World War II has been replicated like say you had the wars in the Middle East, right? The conflicts in the Middle East, because those, I've said on another video that it's interesting what they call a conflict and what they call a war. It seems to me that when it's European on European, white on white, that's called a war, as in World War I, World War II. Then when it's actually the colonial Western powers versus poor people or marginal people, then that's called a conflict. So you have the conflict in Southeast Asia, the conflicts in the Middle East. They're not actually designated wars like that. That probably has to do with the rules of engagement and the laws that are viable in those things. Hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? So I'm just having back in. I just saw someone say on here, alien phobia. That was cool. I like that. So I want to try to land some of my topics. And when I got into the most recent topics, that's actually where I wanted to come with on this broadcast. What the reason I turned it on for this. So I was saying it's interesting that like the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that refers to Masters Among Us. And then I had that brother right there that he's a cold brother because he looks like a heavier dude, but his legs are nice. Like he actually has like the leg work of like a little guy. Can you imagine going up against a heavyweight that actually is also a little guy like that, how his legs look? But I was saying it's interesting that he explained actually how I didn't ask him to do that, but he explained to you what being a heavyweight is about. And it's interesting that the person who's called the greatest fighter that we know, that we've seen before, that I started out this referencing about, John Jones, who gets little like that. He wasn't quick to jump off into the heavyweights, and he was sober about getting into the heavyweights. But that man right there, a real walking, talking heavyweight, broke down for you scientifically what that heavyweight life is about. And so that he's a cool dude. He's actually taught me a lot of cool things, that guy. So what I was saying is that someone had asked about Jamaica like that, and so I'm saying is that in different parts of so we've had different arbitrary caste stratification as human beings, but in the world over within colonialism, but also differently in the Americas, colorism is part of that. That's why I reference that, is that Jamaica has had, they're known to have some of the worst iterations of colorism. And if you look at the land of Jamaica, this has to do with Rastafarianism, and why someone asked me about my appearance, is that the land of Jamaica is very desolate. It's very difficult. Jamaica has some great herbalists. I know of one named Morris Brooklyn. I've communicated with him, and he has information here on YouTube. And he had a brilliant insight, is that he actually distinguished and spelled the difference between what's called a drug, which is like a political social engineering buzzword that draws different support and also punishment, but then that between an entheogen. And so an entheogen would be like a plant, animal, mineral substance that impacts the human being's state of mind, will, and emotion. There's like a couple thousand of them that are known to exist, and maybe combinations, and they're endemic to specific regions. And then the people in those regions are familiar with that, and they have a ancient history and a reciprocity with that plant, and of engaging that plant, so they can be viable and healthy and even vibrant and thrive with that plant as it's endemic to that area, and as it's revered and worshipped with that people in that context. And the European people would be part of that too, like as in the wizened people of Europe are not different than that. But if a person were to appropriate something from a different region, in and out of season, in and out of culture, in and out of pedigree, and especially with the financial incentive, that's bastardized and corrupted by that standpoint alone. And then if you add on top of that politics, the gaming of money, it gets ratchet like that. Both the product, the outcome, and the way that it functions socially, like, is that it's not the same as an entheogen at that point. But sometimes you can get back to that. So like when you strip people of things, it'll grow back. So I think that like ganja in the United States, like even Jamaica too, I don't know that ganja is endemic to Jamaica. It's probably been all over the earth. I haven't looked into the history of ganja, but I think it might come from China. If I'm not mistaken, cannabis comes from China originally. But so too, the African people are not endemic to Jamaica itself, as far as I know. Some people would reason whether Africans had ever not been in the Americas, because if you look at Florida and Northern Africa, the actual soil is exactly the same. You have in America in general, you don't have alligators and crocodiles in America in general, but you do have so in Africa, at least crocodiles, and you do have so in Florida. That's actually a deeper thing, is that Florida is actually still the same thing as Africa. It's another range of Africa. So from that standpoint, it's also arbitrary whether or not we as human beings had ever not been on any part of the earth, including America, including in what you would call our Negroid form like that. And a lot of people would make that argument, and I'm not versed in that, but I think it's likely that would be the case. And that too, you have pyramids on all the continents, not the least of which, actually the most of which in the Americas, including North America, like in the Indiana area, according to Tashrik Bay, a lot of the city Memphis itself, that name, but that too, that they would have a pyramid there as the sporting statement. There's a deeper baseball, and a lot of things are better concealed in plain sight, and that might be one such artifact that's concealed in plain sight. According to Tashrik Bay, some of your museums, your actual great museums, and some of the very wealthy people that have an interest in those museums, the actual power and function of those museums is to hoard control, manage, and render the real artifacts that spell the real ancient history and present reality of us human beings. And it would be difficult, if not impossible, to maintain oppression in its current iteration if people merely had insight into their true history and present, and a lot of it's revealed in those artifacts. Another example of that is like in the city of Philadelphia. You may not dig in Philadelphia, according to Tashik Bey, without a license. That's not only because of like bumping into like power or waistlines, but it's because if you merely play around with the shovel in Philadelphia, you can easily come upon artifacts that are still at large in the vicinity that spell out the real true history of America before the Reconstruction period of the Civil War, which refers to reconstructing the history, not the infrastructure, according to Tashik Bey. And that such too is the occurrence of how we went from understanding ourselves as a republic, as in swearing allegiance to the United States and the republic for which it stands, into understanding ourselves as a democracy. According to Tashik Bey, that has to do also with the Civil War, which was a successful coup d'etat and an end of the former iteration of and line of power that was inherited from the very Moorish people. And such too was Abraham Lincoln, a descendant of that. And that man, Tashik Bey, showed an actual bust of his head, like a sculpture of his head. And if you look at that actual bust of his head, you can see the clear Negro. Here I go. Here I go. My bad. This is the third time I came on. So like sometimes like if you go to different cities, like a lot of things aren't what they're advertised. So like they'll have like a radio broadcast in the morning, and it's called this and that, but it's also like very well organized and curated. But this is the real Little Pebble and the half-assed morning show, because this is the third time I've done the same live stream, and so it's really actually properly half-assed early morning talkingness. But I'm trying to do my best with it. But what I was saying is that so it's arbitrary, like whether or not how long we've been in the Americas, like us having African Negroid ancestry, depending on how we understand history and where we're getting our sources from. But you can say that likely the people that are known as Jamaican now of African descent haven't always been in Jamaica or in the way that they are now, and that too. So they're new. A lot of us American Africans, as we understand ourselves, or as we have enough of our history to understand ourselves, which is part of being from somewhere, is being familiar. When you're from somewhere, like you go to a city that you're from, it's not just that you've been there for a long time, but that you know your history there. So even where we to be in the Americas long or not, as descendants of Africa, or maybe never having left here, to not have access to cohesive history of ours, that actually limits us as though we were estranged and displaced. And so like a lot of times, like according to Tashik Bey also, when you call, like some people would argue whether it's great or not to refer to ourselves as the black people, and that's a deeper thing than it seems on the surface. Is that one is that I've said on this channel that there's a difference between denotative and connotative linguistics, and the word black is actually connotative because that etymologically that word black, it comes from Germanic High German. It refers to Blake, like a white spot. So you're saying you're saying something that you're saying two things at once. You're actually saying an oxymoron in one word when you say black, because that refers to a white spot. So Blake is white spot. So you're saying white spot, but that too, that you would understand that as the color known as black. One is that's a misnomer, but then if you also overlay that onto a people, that's a misnomer, and it amounts to a falsifiable, contemptible, and dispatchable legal designation in an arbitrary caste system, such as these different ones I've been talking about, and America, as a person would understand if they came to a legal contention and based on the footing. A lot of the premise of the United States can be very disrespectful because of some of the history of xenophobia and the means of production. And then we're a person to stand up for himself. A lot of times people will stand up for themselves. Like last night, I saw someone like he was complaining about something. A lot of times when people are complaining, they feel slighted, but they don't understand how they're slighted or the footing that they're on when they stand up for themselves. But when a person actually, if you were to actually stand up for yourselves and try to be coherent in that stance, you will be taxed and tested. Your metal to your real standing will be revealed. Your standing footwork is important in anything, whether a thumb wrestle, whether a boxing match, whether a legal contention, whether a discussion with families or a loved one, or maybe even some bedroom cardio. Your footwork is part of all that. Not to be flippant with that last comment, such that if you were actually to present yourself in a legal venue with the English language, if you're to contend in a legal matter with the English language, with laws that are being agreed upon, that you're also agreeing to participate on based on the English language, based on the laws at play, you can get a better approximation of what the laws are about by the older iterations according to Tashik Bey, such as Black's Law Dictionary, the older iteration of that. The older ones are a lot stronger, so too are older dictionaries sometimes. They give you more of competence in, because that's where things have come from and still function as, before they've been watered down or bastardized or rendered for different purposes that are part of oppression, like to actual strip the true function of things. So according to Tashik Bey, the civics have been taken out of schools, the high schools, the trades have, so too have the etymology, but so too out of the textbooks too, is that the older textbooks are a lot stronger. So like a lot of people, you might like not appreciate the textbooks you had growing up, but some of the older books are actually stronger. Like a lot of the references I make on here are from Arthur Avalon and some of the books that he published about yoga and Bharata, that is India, Bharata Dharma, the faith of India. Those older books of his, they're also stronger, and they're probably prior to some of the censorship, appropriation, and some of the trends that would actually water things down, even as information has proliferated. But when if you were to understand yourself as Black, what that means is that that's a falsifiable alien. Someone said in here alien phobia. That's actually an alienable status in an actual contention in a seat of law. If you were to classify yourself as Black, the very word, the mere fact that you refer to that and classifies that, it severs you from a human family, because you're standing in this life. According to Tashik Bey, when the Holy Bible says that honor thy father and mother, that their days may be. Did you ever notice that? Say you meet some real tough people, right? Like say you were to like come across like say you were like to go to like a hotel, right? You go to a hotel in the middle of a cold ass night right there, right? It's colder than shit. You're about to die if you go back outside, right? You get this savvy person, man. They own the damn hotel. They're doing all this fly shit. They see all the fly people going there. Here come your ass like that, right? How are they gonna deal with you like that? When you just come in there like a regular grown-ass man, whether you got your act together or not, hey, man, you got the money or you don't, man. You got the money or not, man. But you actually come in there with your mom. You come in there with your mom. You see another side of somebody. You actually, like a real, actual, proper badass will actually treat you a lot better in front of your mom. They'll respect your mom more than they respect you, and they'll respect you more by being with your mom. That's a way, way deeper thing. You actually live better on earth by being in right standing with your mom. Good, bad, and ugly, you have better chances of faring well by being in good standing with your own mom and dad, believe it or not. But it's actually deeper than that, because you're part of your family, but your family is also part of a greater family. So even when you go to an actual law venue, you go to a dammy Judge Judy, no less, you actually have stronger standing as part of a family the same way in that venue. So that if you classify yourself as say Black, what you're conceding is that you're not part of a human family that will stand up for you, so you can be pushed around like that. But if you actually were to present yourself as an actual recognized human family, you have more standing like that. So it's actually significant that Swami Vivekananda, he won for Hindu. He contributed to the human condition by winning Hinduism respect on the world stage as a nationally recognized faith system religion. Hinduism is appreciated as a world religion because of the contribution of the great Swami Vivekananda. In a similar way, he elevated the status of that faith system, and there's probably likely a lot of protections of that faith system that the people of India have benefited from, but so too the people of America, because of people like him. Swami Vivekananda in the early 20th century, the Theosophist Society, which were a little bit more arbitrary, not arbitrary, but they were a little bit more loose in what they referenced, and they weren't as vetted from a pedigree. Some of the people that would have been Theosophists, I think they weren't actually endemic and born under that line, but he actually was from India. Then you had Daisetsu Suzuki around that time, the early 20th century, who he won a similar status for Zen. He proliferated books such as, he was a scholar He had a secure tenure and a beautiful, loving wife who supported him as a scholar, and he contributed a lot to understanding about Zen. Some people say that his statements about Zen were a little bit idealistic, and it was his personal take on Zen. And people say that it may have diverged from what had actually been practiced or understood of Zen. But he actually did win respect for Zen and that true meditation. So just the fact that people respect you for meditating, you could say that might have to do with Daisetsu Suzuki. Then too, there was one more person I wanted to reference with that. Those two men, and also even Gerald. I think that some of the what makes us have. So what I'm saying is that that made an inroad, that Swami Vivekananda, who's the National Youth Day in India is named after Swami Vivekananda. He's known to people of India. I think it's called Bharata. The nation of India is known I think that the endemic name on that continent is Bharata. India is not a name from the word from that continent, even though a lot of our English words are borrowed from Sanskrit and appropriate Sanskrit, like the word man. According to Arthur Avalon, the word man comes from Saktiman. So Sakti is like the feminine power that makes life. Sakti is kinetic energy. Anything that moves has a static support, and when energy is viable, moving, it's feminine in that aspect. And because if you see someone who's very powerful, like say I had a glove on, right, and people got to do whatever I say based on the gestures of my finger. If I just go like this, it's going to look a little bit feminine when it's like that much of pure power like that. That's Sakti. But it also has a holder. So you don't have power without a power holder. You don't have actually a woman without a man, because it takes a man to make a woman and a woman to make a man. So too is Saktiman. So man having Sakti is Saktiman. A man without Sakti is not a man. Saktiman is an actual proper man. And that's where the word man comes from, according to Arthur Avalon. But the word India, I think that's not endemic to that region, and it's called Bharata. So Bharata Dharma, the first inroad for that, you had Arthur Avalon would have been publishing at that same time, the early 20th century, but the actual inroads into America to actually loosen up America for different intellectual tolerance, including the proliferation of Arthur Avalon, who popularized the idea of Kundalini, and then also I think Tantra. A lot of our understanding of Tantra, what's actually intelligible about that to a Western audience, it stems from Arthur Avalon and his bilingualism and his versedness in the English language and his scholarship and privy access to insights from Bharata in the books The Serpent Power, The World as Power, Principles of Tantra 1 and 2, and Hymns to Kali. He did those, but I don't think they would have been actually accessible and viable as much in the Western world without first the inroads of Swami Vivekananda. I'm imagining that. I can't make that verbatim, but then after that, that would give you all the way to the point of the Civil Rights Movement, where Dr. Martin Luther King was influenced by Gandhi. Dr. Martin Luther King came from the Christian church, but so too the Christian church itself, both in the Black community and the European side of that. It wasn't as tolerant and open-minded to other faiths, even that too of a figure like Mahatma Gandhi. I imagine that however Martin Luther King came across the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, and he was agreeable, amenable to that, open to that, and it was viable for him to be influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. I imagine that would have to do with Swami Vivekananda and the inroads that he made into America. But then from Gandhi, Dr. Martin Luther King gained the concept of nonviolence, protesting through nonviolence. That's a deeper thing that Mahatma Gandhi got from the Jaina people. I think the Jaina people have something called ahimsa. Ahimsa means harm. Ahimsa means non-injury to any being. If you live out ahimsa to the truest sense, it's very difficult to live up to that, because that amounts to not stepping on grass where it's not appropriate, not eating, not doing certain kind of food, but also making yourself available, because some of those Jaina people, they would allow a bed to be infested with fleas because they wouldn't yet deprive the fleas of the nutrition of their very bodies, what it means to live that to the fullest. That's how thoroughgoing they can be in India, to come across the insight of what it really means to be nonviolent. That's not actually very much different than making yourself available to be beaten while being protesting, because you're being nonviolent, but you're also making yourself available to be victimized, and you're not fighting back when being victimized. That's as intense as allowing a bed to be bed flea ridden. But that too was available and stemmed. It wasn't caused by, but it correlates to the contribution of the trajectory of nonviolence, different intellectual tolerance, different tolerance of different lifestyles, and different modes of making an income for different genders. All that has been benefited and hinges upon the civil rights movement. But prior to that, was influenced by Gandhi, and I think likely him by the Jaina people and the insight of nonviolence, and then that entire inroad from Swami Vivekananda and the contributions that he made. Um, uh, so, uh, but in Jamaica, so I don't think that cannabis is endemic to Jamaica, but people will improvise with wherever they are, and they can bring back the actual experience of entheogens as they have been for human beings the world over. So when people engage ganja, like the Rastafaris engaged ganja, that's reminiscent of a natural people engaging natural entheogens that are available to them. I guess now with globalism and what the Rastafarians would call Babylon, you can't get away from Babylon, as the Rastafaris would tell you. In the system of Babylon, it's not only what's from your area. With globalism, mass production, and Babylon, you could say that what would be more significant than where something is from is how available it is. So the ganja has been available and has been curated and engaged in Jamaica very skillfully by the Rastafaris in some of their natural talent. Because it's not only how smart you are, but it's how in touch you are with your instincts. You have to be honest in the first place to feel your instincts. But if you can feel your instincts, there's a lot of insight and creativity. And the older iterations of entheogens, according to Moorish Brooklyn, the actual plant taught its own creation. So it's not that it's these scientists that are that smart at how to curate something. That's when you have a preconceived notion. So an example of that is like cocaine. So you have the coca leaf in South America that exists naturally, is again an entheogen in South America. But there was a German scientist who came to South America in the 1800s, and he scientifically concentrated the coca leaf to give you cocaine that kills people. So I don't think the coca leaf kills people. It can be very healthy, and it's a mild stimulant. It has a lot of purposes, just like ganja, and it's very healthy, I imagine, by and large. But when you concentrate it with an economic incentive, a preconceived scientific notion and bent, it's very deadly like that. And that's actually a drug at that point, because it's appropriated, it's bastardized, and it's weaponized, and it's economically incentive. That's a proper drug right there. The ones that Dare warned you about. And it's different than an entheogen. But I think that we still do have like some of the experience of entheogens. But what I'm saying is that in Jamaica, that land in Jamaica is very rugged and it's not favorable. So even though there are a lot of talent around like herbalism, such as Moorish Brooklyn, who I reference on here, Jamaica itself is not actually agreeable and suitable for planting crops all the time. So because of that, it's a very rocky area. And so there's a lot of arbitrariness about there's a lot of lack of opportunity in Jamaica going back. So I'm saying is that some of the brilliance of the Rastafari movement, it has to come from deprivation. A lot of great things come from deprivation. So if you have an area like Jamaica where you can't grow a lot of crops all the time, there's still a lot of people there, but they're going to be fighting. So how are we going to spread out the actual resources that we do have? You need something as arbitrary as a caste system, as arbitrary as colorism. So it's actually not ironic that of all the Americas and the Caribbean, some of the worst iterations of caste stratification in terms of colorism is in Jamaica, and some of the most desolate, rugged terrain to farm. Not that there's no opportunity, but that is very skewed and polarized. That too exists in Jamaica, and that might have been the fertile grounds for the Rastafari movement, which would make them amenable and agreeable and ready for the onset of a figure like Haile Selassie, and why that would occur in Jamaica. Just a little bit of background with that. But I'm just saying is that having dreads like that, or even ganja like that, that's not what it means to be Jamaican, and that's not actually what the Rastafari movement is about in itself. The healthy stuff, the cool stuff, the hair, that's part of being yourself and being strong. The Rastafari movement is more so just about strength. It's a real human cause that's about strength. I think, and I found that your hair, it has more functions than people normally appreciate. You're more attractive, you're stronger, you have more confidence, you have more vigor, vitality with your being yourself whatsoever. Were you to have hair, were you to have no hair, embracing yourself as yourself is the best standpoint for anyone. But so long as you do have hair, and you may have hair, then it doesn't hurt to be yourself also, even if that's to have long hair. And so that's more so what I understand dreads is about, and ganja is about, and Rastafari is about. It's about strength in the first and the last place, and human happiness and opportunity and equity in the first and last place. The other cool stuff is within that. It's a talent in that. It's a tactic. The hair is more of it's a blessing, but it would be more of a tactic towards freedom than anything. So too is ganja. Ganja aids in health. but the outcome in health and the enjoyment of health is in freedom. Right there, that's the cause. The cause is freedom. The tactic is anything that's used towards the cause, like that. But I'm not actually from Jamaica. I've looked into a little bit of Rastafarianism though. But the last thing I want to say, I'll land this one soon, is that what I was saying is that, so I think that we began to become humans and think like we do because we started to stand up straight, but that actually came from our competitive nature and how we stand up to next to one another in a pecking order, and how much our posture